You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello, welcome to the show. I'm so excited. Today I have Beth Somich. I've followed along with everything Beth is doing on social media for quite some time now, so this is very cool to have her here, kind of in real life. Beth is a licensed therapist with a group private practice located in North Carolina called Your Journey Through. She specializes in family dynamic work and is passionate about promoting modern mental health and making therapy accessible and relatable. She helps other therapists promote their own mental health platforms through expanding their reach on social media and building thriving private practices. She is also the podcast host of the podcast called My Therapist Thinks. Boom. All right. So much to cover today. Beth and I get into the ethics of social media and being a therapist, how she makes that work, and how she coaches other therapists to do the same. We talk about the pillars of modern therapy. We talk about teen, college-aged, and post-grad mental health challenges that Beth is seeing within her clients and what parents can do to help. We talk about family dynamics and enmeshment. We also talk about motherhood, entrepreneurship, and her experience as a military spouse. Yeah, lots to go over. Stay tuned. Here's Beth. Hey, Beth. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I usually start by asking, why did you become a therapist? So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about your journey, please?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I grew up in a town in upstate New York on the border of Vermont with very few mental health resources. You had to travel over an hour to get to a therapist's office. And it was just very evident in the community and in the culture that mental health wasn't really prioritized for that reason, geographically, financially. And, I started to notice that. Not only in my community, but in my family, even in my friendships as a kid growing up, and, just really developed a passion for learning more about this, like why are things the way they are? And I always say, instead of reading Cosmopolitan as a teenager, I was reading Psychology Today, like trying to learn all the things, just so intrigued by it.
Mm-hmm.
So I did know that I wanted to be a therapist, like from the jump when I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. Which made my path to becoming a therapist, I think, easier relatively. And so I went to college and I went to grad school and I majored in psychology and sociology and gender studies. And now I have a private practice and love my work with clients.
Nice. Okay. So when you look back and you're, noticing that mental health services aren't available, aren't really, encouraged, what were you seeing there to be a need for it for? Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what were you observing growing up that was like, someone could use a therapist here? And maybe you wouldn't have put it that way then, but what do you get what I'm asking you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, all of it. Like, because now as a therapist, I work from a more modern mental health perspective that really prioritizes preventative therapy. So my kind of view is that therapy is for everyone. And if you go, it will help prevent these kind of big traumatic responses to trauma that happens in your life, because most people will experience trauma in their life. And if they create this supportive foundation in therapy and they do their own work and they have a space to process and feel safety in doing so, then it's going to impact them. I don't want to say less, but that they're more likely to have resilient outcomes. And so I do see it from that perspective, but also what I was seeing when I was growing up were things like alcoholism, abuse, isolation, depression, intense anxiety, children who may have experienced neglect, whether emotional, physical, financial, all of it, and just how mental health issues manifested out of all of that. And so, the town I grew up in, I think the average income for a 4-person family was $30,000.
Wow.
So very rural. And because therapy was not accessible and wasn't an option, I was talking to a friend from home about this that I grew up with. It almost seemed like because it wasn't an option that many people rejected it and
we can't have it, so we don't want it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And this defense mechanism. Whereas if there was like some embracing of that and accessible resources, I just wonder what good could have come out of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, and just to kind of push you on this one more time, looking back, did you have the awareness of, maybe you did because you were reading psychology today, but did you have the awareness of professional help is needed here? I don't know. I just,
yeah, I would say
that's pretty evolved actually.
Yeah. I mean, I felt dysregulated by some things. I knew something wasn't right. I didn't have the language at that age, of course. I feel like I started to understand how that something's not right here. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel healthy. Probably when I was 11 or 12 is when that kind of light bulb kind of started coming on. And then also, I had family in different places of the country and I would go there and I'd be like, it's really different here. Accessible and, there's resources available for these types of things that aren't available where I live. And so while I, was by no means a therapist or had the language at that age, I did, your nervous system feels it and absorbs it and responds to it. So I would say I was able to kind of acknowledge it for me.
Okay. And is there anyone that you're in touch with from home or family that, sees what you do today and is like, what? What I don't know, how has your profession been received, I guess, by those back home?
So it's really funny that you say that, because I feel like the people that are probably doing that, because I'm sure there aren't telling me.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Let them keep their opinions to themselves.
But I will say, even my own family, my dad, when I told him I wanted to go to college to be a therapist, even the therapist that lived an hour away, many social workers, maybe, he actually was a prison warden. So he was around some social workers in that capacity. And he was just like, Mary Beth, they don't make any money. You're never going to make any money. And I'm also concerned about you and the people you might work with. And so, I went to college in New York City, of all places, after coming from this tiny town. And I remember on orientation day, my dad brought me and he pulled aside this psychology professor and was like, so what can she actually do with this? And I was mortified. Fine. I literally walked out of the auditorium and just was so upset. But now I'm he was really just looking out for me. He just wanted to make sure that I had opportunities and, had my best interest at heart. And now he's my biggest cheerleader, my biggest supporter. He's like, look what my daughter did. Look at this podcast she's on, or this article. Thinks it's so cool. Helped me move into my second office and things like that. But yeah, I will say that a lot of my friends growing up who struggled with mental health issues or whose family members did are now, you know, following my Instagram account and DMing me like, it's incredible what you're doing. Or like, my mom saw your post and it actually opened up a conversation that we've never had before. Like, oh my, I have chills. Like that's like the most meaningful, rewarding stuff
That's
to me.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I have a personal question that I'm going to set aside and put a pin in to come back to related to that. But you know, you mentioned now being on Instagram and you said earlier preventative therapy as being part of, you know, a modern mental health approach. Are there other aspects within what you would consider modern that you do differently that you want to share?
Yeah. So I've kind of coined the term modern mental health as my definition for it is accessible, relatable, and relevant.
Mm.
So part of being accessible, I think, is showing up on social media, giving people language and psychoeducation for free that they can run with and decide what they want to do with it, how they want to receive it or act upon it. And then being relatable, right? Like being just showing up as a human in the therapy room. And I am not a proponent of like, you know, I'm the one with the master's degree or the PhD and I'm in the chair, you know, because that creates a power dynamic and a hierarchy that I don't feel is the most therapeutically valuable
Mhm.
for our time together. And so I'm okay with sharing a little bit about me if it helps the client connect and relate and feel more comfortable and safe. Like, I'm a mother, I'm an army wife. Like, these are points that I can connect with people on. And then relevant, like, let's make this really relevant to your life. There's not just blanket approaches. Like, I really want to tailor it to your needs and your interests. And if that person isn't me, maybe I refer you to someone who is, and that's okay. But just making sure that, you know, we're always keeping it relevant to their needs.
Okay. Well, it seems to me after interviewing as many therapists as I have that there does seem to be this like really intentional, thoughtful decision and then approach to choosing whether or not to be on social media. What was that process like for you? Did you question it at all? How did you talk yourself through it and eventually start to do it? Anything
Yeah.
there you want to say?
It's really, really evolved. So I started in 2019 and I was like, I really just want to show up relatably, but also really professionally. Like, I have a lot of ethics to consider because in your graduate programs, they're like, don't tell people anything about you, be
Yeah.
a completely blank slate. And what I found in my actual work with clients is that that's not as therapeutic.
Right.
So I wanted to show up and just be accessible outside of session. And at the beginning, I think I was tiptoeing a lot. Like, I was very, very careful about like every single word choice and every post. And then as it kind of snowballed into something that felt good and was really resonating with people, and they appreciated like the more real I was, like language I used, like snapshots of me personally. So it really evolved into something that was much more comfortable for me. I still really value professionalism, even on social media. And I think you can do that and still be very relatable and open. And so so 2019 to 2020 is when I started. And then that first year I gained, I think, over 10,000 followers. And that's when it was like harder to grow. Like, reels weren't a thing. You didn't have the link in bio feature till you hit 10K.
Yeah.
And so I would have these other therapists reaching out and saying, you know, how are you growing like this? Like, that's cool. I want to do that too. And so then the pandemic hit. And because I had had all these therapists kind of coming to me and asking me to like have coaching appointments with them about social media as a therapist, I was like, let me just create a course that therapists can take, and then they can grow their social media presence and connect with their ideal clients who were really needing them right now. Because in 2020, it was like this mental health boom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone was struggling. So that's when I created Insta Growth for Therapists. And it's a course about being on Instagram specifically as a therapist. And now there's 230 therapists enrolled in that course.
Wow.
And it's been so cool to watch their just growth and evolution on the platform. So
Cool. Yeah, cool. I saw your course, and it's funny. I know I always have to remind myself that like I'm not a therapist. I saw your course, and then I actually Maddie Spear.
Oh
I almost took her TikTok course, and I like DM'd her. I was like, listen, I know I'm not a therapist, but like, can I be an honorary? And she's like, of course. I
Oh my
didn't.
gosh, yes. I have coaches, I have chiropractors, I have virtual assistants, two therapists, all in the course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Matt, it's so funny you bring up Maddie. We are suite mates. So I am in this
Oh, shut
office.
up.
Yes, her office is down the hall right now.
God, that's so funny. I had no idea.
And we connected through Instagram, or we would have never like made that connection that we were in the
Oh
same
my
city
goodness.
ourselves and went in on a lease together. And then she did a module in Insta Growth for Therapists about being a TikTok therapist.
Oh my gosh, that's so
And
funny.
then launched her own course about TikTok.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're great friends.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny. Yeah, I had her on at the end of last year. That's so funny.
Yeah, she's great.
Yes. All right. So perhaps I could just go back to my personal question here before I take you down another road. I find, and I'm wondering what maybe if you could take yourself back to when you first got on Instagram. I sometimes wonder if okay. I sometimes wonder, I feel like I lack a real personal like connection with people on Instagram through my account. And I have wondered if it is because part of it is because that it's mainly people that I know in real life or they know me through another person in real life. And is there, because of like the topics that I talk about, which would be similar to yours, just not from the professional standpoint, from the personal standpoint, that it feels, I don't know, embarrassing or shameful to be like, hey, I'm relating to this really rough thing you're going through or whatnot. And I don't get a lot of those, hey, this post was great, this episode was great, but I know because I have analytics, people are listening. So I wonder if there was like, I just wonder going back, like, was there a moment where that changed, where you felt like doors opened and how do I break them down?
That's a great question, honestly, because it was definitely a progression. Like in the beginning, I did kind of feel like it was crickets. Like people were just kind of watching and
Yeah,
like,
that's how I feel.
what are you doing? This is a little taboo. I still, because I'll do like Meme Mondays, and I have like some family members that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she posted that meme. Like how scandal, like older family members.
Yeah.
And they'll like even make little comments, and I just kind of laugh because it's just different. But yeah, I think that as I started to I'm going to say gain a little bit more credibility, like
Okay.
going on podcasts,
Yeah.
creating my own podcasts or having different features. Like I
Mm-hmm.
just think it opens something up for other people to be like, oh, if other people are okay with us talking about this, and then I can join in.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think there was some of that.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
It's
Almost
kind
like,
of like a group effect.
yes, the group effect. And I was also thinking about it as you're talking, as almost like as much as you are you and you're the face and the name that they know, establishing that credibility almost takes you into a different category of person. It's like now you're this expert as opposed to Mary Beth from around the corner that I went to high school with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Mary Beth from around the corner, they'd be okay having like a one-on-one sit-down conversation in a restaurant, but social media feels vulnerable.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I feel right now. Like,
Mhm.
but on the other side, I'm going, it's okay. Have it with me on social media. Come on. It's okay.
Yeah. I think it starts to trend that way
Yeah.
eventually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just curious. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then so you mentioned, I did not realize you were an Army wife. Does that account for the move from New York to North Carolina?
Yeah, there was a couple pit stops too. So
Yeah.
I graduated from Columbia in 20, what year? 15. And then got my first job in Virginia, where my husband was currently stationed. And he was supposed to get out of the Army from there. And then the Army was like, just kidding, we're sending you to Nashville.
Hmm.
So then I went to Nashville, and then, but we knew he still wanted to get out. And he was applying to graduate school at that point.
Okay.
And then we were kind of like torn between all of these places, and then landed in Raleigh, North Carolina. So in a year, we moved 3 times because of his
Oh,
Army
wow.
trajectory. So it did kind of delay my jump into private practice for a little bit. But by the time I finally landed here in Raleigh, I was like ready to go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Did you
yeah.
have to keep getting like relicensing everywhere you went?
I just didn't because I knew they were so temporary. So I did get licensed in Virginia because that's where I took my first job. But then I was only there for several months. And then I knew Nashville was kind of going to be a blip before we found out our
Okay.
like permanent location. So
Okay.
I didn't even bother getting licensed in Nashville. I actually worked briefly with NAMI, the
Oh,
National Alliance
yeah.
on Mental Illness, and helped them with just some groups. And they were kind of support group based, so I didn't need to be licensed in that capacity, but
I see.
I had all the training. So that's kind of what I did in the meantime in Nashville.
Okay. Just curious. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in your work now, knowing that you wanted to do this for so long, is there anything about what you do now that you could have not imagined? Like, what did you picture, this role to be, and how does it differ for the better, for the worse, for however?
Yeah. I mean, I had no idea I'd be on social media doing
Yeah,
this. Like
that's
social
true.
media didn't even really exist in this way. Like I think Facebook existed obviously
Hmm.
when I was in high school, but not I mean Instagram and TikTok weren't a thing for
Right.
sure. Those were like the MySpace days.
Yeah.
And I did not think, I mean, even in graduate school, I didn't think that I would be on social media as a therapist because I was told that that's not advisable.
Hmm.
So, and that has really become like a whole separate piece of my work.
Hmm.
And now I have a second course because the therapists who took Insta Growth for Therapists were growing so much that they were getting these partnership opportunities from brands. And then they were like, Mary Beth, I don't know what I'm doing with this. So then I created my second course called the Connected Collab for brand partnerships for therapists, coaches, wellness professionals, because you have to incorporate the ethics because you are still a licensed professional. So they're like
Interesting.
certain partnerships you really shouldn't take.
Right.
And
Huh.
then, so yeah, that's now a part of my work, like partnering with different brands and companies. Like I've never imagined that. I really thought I was just going to be doing one-on-one client work or like, family sessions and things like
Mhm.
that. But yeah, and even creating a course, right? Like I
Yeah.
didn't see that really for
Yeah.
myself. One thing I thought I would do as a therapist was write a book. I haven't done that yet, but I think
It'll
eventually.
happen. Yeah, it'll happen. It's like par
Yeah.
for the course. Start
Eventually.
small, social media, then like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
ebook and then the course and then the
Right. But there are so many opportunities for therapists, and thinking back to like my own dad's skepticism on like, how can you make money as a therapist? But
Mm.
now there are so many different ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay, and so who are you, generally speaking, of course, not talking about anyone specific, but who are you working with and what are they coming to you for?
Yeah. So I love, love, love family dynamic work. And I
Okay,
do
what does that
that.
mean?
So looking at like kind of the structure of a family system, one thing I specialize in is enmeshment. A lot of people don't even know that term, but it
Oop.
essentially means like your family system is totally lacking in boundaries. There are these unwritten rules that everyone is expected to abide by so that they don't rock the ship. And then usually I'll just give you kind of like a picture of how this presents. I will say mostly women will come to me and say, my partner is totally enmeshed. And there's actually like some statistics behind this that what tends to happen is that a couple, like parents, a couple will not be meeting each other's needs emotionally. And then mom usually looks to her children to meet her emotional needs. Typically, sometimes a daughter, but even more strongly a son sometimes. And then there becomes this unhealthy attachment. And the kids don't get to experience healthy differentiation in adolescence like they typically would.
Okay.
And so they're just kind of, some people understand it as the term codependent, but just like really bonded without boundaries. But then when those children try to start their own adult families, that presents as a big issue. And so that's where I come in to start instituting healthy boundaries. And usually there's like a little bit of fire before it settles because the parents are like, whoa, what's going on here? So that is some of kind of the more specialized work I do, but in a more general capacity, I work with a lot of teens, college students, young adults, and adults who just are experiencing a lot of anxiety, communication issues, relationship issues, and just stress that typically stems back to things going on with their family.
Okay. Okay. So this is the first time I'm hearing the
Enmeshment.
enmeshment.
Yes. Yep.
That's a funny word. Okay. What kind of boundaries are we talking about that we're lacking? Like, what are some examples of that?
Yeah. So one really common example is, for example, your in-laws might expect that you are at their house for every holiday. And you're like, hey, wait a minute. I have my own family that I kind of want to see on some of these holidays too.
Okay. So sorry. Let me just clarify. So using the example that you gave initially of like the players, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about this now male person
Mm-hmm.
is coming from the household you described, and now you're working with him and maybe his wife, his partner, because he's like all like, what's the word? Like he's enmeshed.
Yeah. Because it's creating issues in their marriage.
What's the word? She gave it to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because then that lack of boundaries is creating issues in their own marriage. And this can go like oppositely too. Like sometimes
Of course.
a mother and a daughter are so tightly enmeshed that, it's creating issues with her partner. But I would say statistically, it's usually the wife and then we have this whole narrative in our culture of the monster-in-law. Like that is totally an enmeshment like thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of unpacking that.
Okay. And so this could be, like you said, the assumption of holidays, or I would imagine you would see a lot of issues when that dynamic becomes grandparents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like the showing up, the doing things without asking,
Exactly.
oh my God. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if you could, like, how do you start to work with someone on that, like that? Like, what do you start to do? How do you, I don't know, how do you start to work through that?
Yeah, I think at first the enmeshed child that's usually coming to therapy has to see it as a problem, because that's where we get stuck a lot is say the wife is coming to me saying my husband's enmeshed. If the husband doesn't want to change anything, it's going to be tough, right? And then I'm working with the wife or the partner on, what can we do in this situation if your partner doesn't see anything wrong with this, or maybe they might, but they don't want to change it. And fear usually of rocking the boat and what it might do to either of their parents, if they were to set a boundary, like, cause it's like, you don't do that in enmeshed families.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a lot of the work. Assertiveness training, identifying wants and needs personally and in the relationship, and just like the vision that you have for your family and whether that's aligning value-wise right now with the current behaviors in play. Yeah, it's a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay. And I can imagine, I can assume, but I would love, to hear your words on it. Talk to some of the potential, risks that this couple is facing by not working through these issues.
By staying enmeshed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does start to impact their own relationship because there's a level of emotional closeness that's not being respected in their relationship if it's still with the nuclear family of origin. One partner usually feels pretty disrespected, probably by the in-laws potentially. And then that manifests as resentment. And that's always how lack of boundaries manifest, as resentment. Like, the reason we want boundaries is to keep our relationships protected from resentment and healthy. Like, if you care about someone, it's important to set boundaries with them.
Mm-hmm.
So reframing that as boundaries are not scary, they're actually protective of healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. You can see it. No one listening can, but you can see my wheel spinning, trying to.
Yeah, good. I love this.
Yeah, well, because it's hard. It's hard, because I'm certain everybody that comes to you with this very big issue that we're talking about, it looks different every time. And then so like, if we take it to the grandparent example, like this family now, they're at the grandparent level, what's happening for that grandkid either in the moment or later in life if these sorts of boundary issues and enmeshment is not handled? Like, we can know possibly that maybe the parents don't stay together, maybe this, like, are there other things that maybe I wouldn't think of that could
It
present?
really is dependent on how the parents cope with or respond to the enmeshment, because I've seen many outcomes. Like, sometimes the parents of that child now, right? They're just accepting the enmeshment and going along with it. So then the child thinks that this is a completely normal way of relating to family. And now it's generational enmeshment that's even more strong when that child goes to have their own family.
Okay.
So yeah, I've definitely worked with couples who are the grandchildren or even the great grandchildren of this enmeshed system. And it is so deeply woven in their family culture that it's almost like unimaginable to pull off it. And then, I've seen it go the opposite way of, maybe the parents divorce and then the child is coping with that, because the parent, like the one spouse, didn't feel respected in the relationship.
Okay. All right. So if we think about this, like you said, generally, it more so would be in like the typical like gender roles that we've just been talking about. It also occurs to me that this could be very cultural as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, like, adds a whole other layer.
Yes, it does.
Even religion, I feel like religion could play a huge role in that as well. Generational.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we see that about a lot of behaviors. If you think about it, like, why is spanking acceptable in some cultures and not others? Or why, why we're normalizing a lot of kind of mental health concepts for some cultures and not others. So really unpacking that, that was a big part of my training at Columbia, because it was important for me to go to like a multiculturally competent program with emphasis on that, because I knew I wanted to do this work. And so really learning about themes in different cultures, and how all of that integrates into this too.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. You also, like you said, work with teens and college students. Give me some, perhaps like broad strokes of some of the things that are going on for those age groups right now that are relevant and really just forefront of a lot of the conversations you're having.
I mean, anxiety to the 100th degree, right? I think that our culture right now is predisposing these upcoming generations to anxiety. A lot of my college students or even young adults are kind of navigating disappointment with post-pandemic. They had some of these really hyped up years of their life, given to the pandemic. And so trying to kind of navigate that as we come out of it, and, the grief and disappointment around that. And then what that did socially, maybe for them, feeling isolated and being predisposed to some mental health issues that way, not feeling like they really had the opportunity to, take advantage of certain things that they wanted to. So right now, that's a lot of the conversation: anxiety and disappointment, grief even. And then, of course, with my teens, primarily, but also my college kids, there's a lot of comparison through social media.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to get to that in a second. Is there anything that, as the position you're in, you're working with the teens and college students, so you're not working with their parents. I mean, necessarily.
Yeah, not usually, sometimes, but not usually. Yeah.
Okay. So if you had a chance to like get all of the parents in a room, are there one, two, three things that you might be like, if I could just scream this from an auditorium stage at all the parents of kids this age, like these are the things that I would say, that these are the things they're missing, these are the things they're getting wrong, these are the things their kids want them to hear.
Yeah, the first one would be, and you might have heard this advice before, but gosh, I just wish we could like put it on a billboard everywhere. Would be ask your child if they want help or if they just want you to listen.
Mm.
So many times when kids try to go to their parents, and I say kids, but I'm yes, kids too, but also teens and even college kids and even adult children.
I know, I was just thinking wives all
Yeah.
the time.
Go to their parents and they're talking to them about something, maybe even venting to them about something. And the parent automatically jumps in with all of these options or ideas or whatever. And a lot of my clients will say that's kind of a form of disrespect in a way, because they're assuming that I haven't already thought of those options for myself and already covered those bases and thought, maybe that's not a good option for me for some reason. And at this point, I'm just talking through it. I've already made a decision. I'm just talking through it. And so them throwing more solutions at me is invalidating, not what I need, does not feel supportive. Of course, that's not the parent's intention.
Right.
But I just wish they would ask first so that they could understand that, because when they don't and the child gets frustrated, then sometimes the parent even gets frustrated back. Like, oh, well, I don't even know how to help you. And you never like anything I say. And then you just added to your child's stress like tenfold by now creating an argument with them because they, never had the intention to accept that influence. They just wanted to come to you for support and feel heard. So,
yeah, parenting's fun.
Yeah, totally. I have a 2-year-old. She turns 2 tomorrow.
Oh,
yeah. And I'm like, oh, the teenage years are going to be fun.
yeah. See, I struggle with the toddlers though. Like,
Really? Yeah.
I like almost look forward to those deep, hard, moody conversations, like this toddler stage of just like nothing makes sense and there's like chaos and I'm overstimulated on a regular, like this is hard. This is a hard phase for me.
Yeah, this morning my daughter had a meltdown because she wanted to put her hood on and her coat did not have a hood.
Yeah.
Like, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
It's like exactly. Like it's just if it's not that, it's something as ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is there anything now that you have a 2-year-old that just in being a mom yourself that has changed your perspective on parenting or motherhood that you may have, differed from before?
I mean, gosh, it's literally a process of healing your inner child and reparenting when you
it's exhausting.
A child.
Yeah,
and I think for some, it brings up wounds that maybe you didn't know were there. For me, it kind of helped heal them. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I was able to separate myself a little bit, take things a little less personally, understand it was like really never about me.
Yeah.
It was about my parents needing to prioritize mental health at certain points of my upbringing when maybe they didn't.
Yeah.
And, I understand that now and I can empathize now. But yeah, gosh, it's like such a process of healing yourself through parenthood too.
Yeah. Yeah. Which it's interesting because a lot of times I have conversations that center around it bringing up the wounds that, and having to heal them. But I imagine that the reverse that you're talking about is equally as exhausting because I feel like in some sense it's hard for me, like it's hard to learn that they're worth, I don't know, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. It is hard to see my childhood differently now as a parent when before I like totally saw it as perfect. And
Mhm.
and that's challenging because I can see where like in a very real way, like it was life, it was real. There were things now looking back that maybe didn't serve me best or that I interpreted a way that they weren't intended, just as you were saying. And and that's hard.
Mhm.
But when you have a childhood perhaps that you kind of know wasn't perfect, what I'm trying to get at is I think sometimes it's easier to just continue to like blame that and to like be angry at it. And then to have to heal it is like just it takes as much work as it does to realize that maybe things weren't perfect. Like I don't know, it just
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as you were saying it. It's kind of like your perspective before parenthood and your perspective after on your childhood from either camp you're coming from, whether you knew it was dysfunctional or you thought it was perfect.
yeah.
It's a process of healing.
Yeah. Either way, I think is it's just so jarring. Like you
Mhm.
spend the majority of your life at this up until a certain point thinking things were a certain way and then they're
Yeah,
not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I said I wanted to go back to the social media thing. I have talked at length, I think about, teens and tweens and social media usage and the comparison and things on the show. But one other thing I do like to talk about as it relates to social media is the connection between social media creating content and mental health. And because I find just as a person who's on social media, like creating content like can either give me a real mental health high or a real mental health low. And it seems like everyone today, whether you're a small business owner, a teacher, a therapist, or a mom, you're on social media or you feel a pressure to be. And it's like this whole mind cluster of stuff. I don't know. Are there any aspects of creating content for you now that you've been doing it for a while that you have just been like, you know what, this doesn't serve me. I'm not going to do this anymore. And or these aspects of creating content fulfill me. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, have you set up
Yeah.
boundaries for yourself in that way because of how it impacts your mental health?
Definitely. I will never recommend anyone who says you have to post every day or multiple times a day. Like, what are your boundaries with yourself in this platform? Because that doesn't feel totally sustainable. Maybe if it's your only full-time job, but like you were saying, for many people, it's not. They have a full-time job and then they feel this pressure to show up on social media consistently, which creates at least another part-time job for them,
Yeah.
usually. So yeah, I've really set limits on the amount I post, when I post. Like I usually don't post on the weekends unless there's
Mm.
like a mental health event going on. Um, and then also, I really haven't bridged out into TikTok yet because I don't feel like I need another platform right now. Like I'll dabble in it, but Instagram, I mean, all my courses are centered on Instagram. Like that's my platform of choice. I don't need
Okay.
to be on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've even thought, maybe I should have multiple Instagram accounts, one just for private practice and one for like Insta growth and my business stuff and coaching. And I was like, even that feels like a lot. So I think just kind of condensing it down and setting limits with, how you're willing to show up, is important for sustainability too.
Yeah. Have you gotten any, hate and all that you've had to process or deal with and how do you do that?
Girl, I have had to file police reports.
Stop.
Yes. And this is the
No.
stuff that we don't talk about. And I would like love eventually to talk about this. I don't know if I'm like in a place to yet, but just behind the scenes, what large accounts on social media and content creators deal with.
Yeah.
Like harassment, right? Business sabotage, plagiarism, um, yeah, just all of it. And I will say that even despite all of that, I feel like it is still worth being on there.
That's
Like
saying something.
the messages that I receive, I got one yesterday that was like from this kind of like, stereotypical like macho man, and who was like, thank you so much for your content. It's really helping me set boundaries. And I was just like, yes. And then today I got one from another therapist that was like, I love how you're showing up on here. Just all these like kind of like affirming messages, or, you're inspiring me to do this. And I don't know. I think it's worth it for that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're
Mm-hmm.
always going to get people who are unhappy or out to get you regardless. So yeah, there are definitely ways to protect yourself and protect your family online, and to practice safety and things like that. But it's also just part of it sometimes.
Yeah. And of course, without getting into the specific details of your situation, knowing what you've been through with it, do you have any advice for fellow creators in either preventing or how to cope, or
Mhm.
I don't know.
I used to feel like as a therapist that I needed to be, I don't really know what the word is, but if someone was showing disrespect or dissatisfaction with anything that I was doing, that I really needed to like hear them out about it. And, um, you know, I would not in the past like automatically block someone for that. And now that block button is absolutely coming out. I'm like, nope, we don't need this here.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, I think that those boundaries have gotten a lot stronger for
Mm-hmm.
me, of just, you don't need to be in this space then,
Yeah.
if that's your intention here.
Yeah.
And I control this space. I think people forget that they control their accounts.
Yeah.
And you can delete people, you can block people, you can also unfollow people on your end if you feel a certain way about them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to just go with that instinct, because I think for therapists specifically, their empathy is what makes them the most vulnerable to being attacked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just
Yeah.
keeping that in mind.
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you said that, because I think that that's a great reminder about, us. We control our account. Like it's it's our account. And I think social media has changed a lot for the better in that way, in the sense that I think that years ago, and I'm talking maybe like 5 years ago, I helped run social media accounts for our family business and things like that. And there was such this like sense of needing to come across or be like real, to the point of like leaving hateful comments, or like deleting challenging thoughts and comments, because it was like, oh, if you delete it or you just ignore it, then you're basically saying that you're right, and you are the only thing that matters, and this and that. And it's like, I think because so many more people have become creators, like the average person, for lack of a better way, I think it has opened that up a little bit to, gosh, I'm having trouble with my words today. Darn it. But
I
it's
hear
like,
what you're saying.
it
Yeah, I
it
think there's
makes it a little bit, I think, more personal. Like I think more people now understand what it's like to put yourself out there, and therefore have more tolerance for the blocks and the deletes and the unfollows. That being said, it's got a long way to go. There's still a lot of judgment out there, and there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what it is to create content and put it out there. But it's like, if the person down the street puts a video out and they get a bad comment, it's like all of a sudden they understand maybe what it's like for someone who's been doing it for a long time with a huge following. And you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think there's a difference, right? If someone
gosh,
says,
that was rough.
no, no, I get it. I totally see what you're saying, because like if someone DMs me and they're like, I can't believe you said this about like red flags in relationships. This just happened. And they had misinterpreted something I said. And so we had a conversation about it. And by the end of the conversation, they were like, oh my gosh, thank you for explaining that. I didn't view it that way. I totally misread that. And we had a great conversation about it. And I'm so willing to do that. But that's a very different vibe than someone just leaving straight hate.
Yeah.
Like a personal attack. I have no tolerance for that. You don't need to be here. Like, I don't want to give you access to me anymore. And that's my boundary with that. So if there's such a different feel between those two things that, yeah, I can totally work with one and just absolutely not the other.
Okay. All right. And I mean, I think I'm looking at my notes, but I think last question for you, along similar lines of creating these boundaries for ourselves on social media and things. I talk a lot about self-care, and you're a business owner, you're a content creator, you're a mom, you're a wife, like you're a lot of things. How do you make sure you take care of yourself? And when I say how, I don't just mean what do you do, but like actually how do you make it happen?
Yeah. Great. I love that question. And I've really put a lot more thought into that this year. I think in like end of 2020, I experienced like some pretty intense burnout. And then that was a big pivoting point for me of like, what is my capacity really? And I noticed how much of that burnout was stemming in fear or scarcity mindset. And so really healing that piece to move forward. And every year, I think progressively, I've decided to do less. So for instance, this year, I'm not live launching my courses. They're just open for purchase because the live launching was really exhausting multiple times, like 3 to 4 times yearly. And it's like a 3-month cycle. So I was like, I just am going to pull back from that this year, and they're just going to be open for purchase. So that's a way I'm pulling back. Just taking on, I have associates that I can outsource my clients to now and just stay with the amount that I feel most comfortable seeing, to protect my energy that way. Because I think therapists also, they just want to show up for people and they want to be that person, but you can't be that person for everyone. Sometimes you have to be that person for yourself first. So having boundaries around that. I mean, if you want like the real logistical stuff, I like have monthly massage memberships and I get my nails done every 3 weeks.
And you just put it in your calendar, right?
I put it in my calendar. I schedule childcare, or if my husband's not available, because it's important. And it's stuff that helps me feel like myself, connected to myself. I have my own therapy. So, just putting those appointments consistently in the calendar and showing up for them. And also just doing the things that bring me joy. Like this morning, I brought my daughter to tutu school. Like, I totally could have taken a client and made some money during that time, but that's not my only value. So I want to do that fun stuff with her that she can remember. So I think just sticking to your values is important.
Okay, I lied. I have another question. The fear, scarcity mindset, like what did you do to get through that?
A lot of self-soothing.
Okay.
I'm an Enneagram 3. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
Yeah, I think I'm what am I? I think I'm a 3.
Really, I wouldn't be surprised. They're overachievers.
I'm a 3.
And so there's just this kind of like constant inclination to be doing, and the next thing and the next thing. And the big question that 3s have to ask themselves is, who are you without the doing? And so really,
say it again.
Who are you without the doing?
Without the doing.
Yeah. Like,
oh no.
I know. That's a real tough one to sit with.
I'm someone.
Yeah. But what would that look like or feel like? Would there be discomfort? And I think that's a question worth wrestling with, and making sure that your motivations are healthy and not stemming out of like this flight state, like fight or flight. And so I think there's been a lot of just personal growth there for me to say, how much of my productivity is out of fear or flight, and how can I reel that back and connect with like what I really want to be doing? when I feel regulated.
Okay. I had to look. I
Having
am
an
a big
emotional
three.
response right now.
Yeah, because I am a 3, and I'm like, okay, she's talking about herself, not you.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, and the last thing I want to say is it reminded me of as you were talking before too. I was listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with Heather Chauvin. She's a business coach and life coach, or all the things. And I listened to an episode of hers today where she's talking about how there's like that she seems to notice that there's like phases where like phase 1 is like total like growth and change and like jumping in, and then phase 2 is just the consistency of mastering all the things that you started, and then like the cycle repeats itself. And she was like, the phase 2 is about doing less better.
Yeah.
And like that seemed to be like what you're saying, like, doing less, but not floundering. It's like you're trying to do less, but do those things really well.
Yeah. And you'll need to send me this podcast because this is totally kind of like I'm in that right now. And just reminding myself that, I set up these systems and this structure for myself already, right? Like just because
exactly.
I'm not continuing to create and do more,
Mm-hmm.
I can just rest in what I already created now.
Yes, that is exactly what she was talking about. And the trick, though, that she talked about is it can be tricky identifying which one you're in. Because, at least for me, what I can identify is that I might be in one, but I want to be in the other.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that's tricky.
That's a great point for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, you're gonna have to link that podcast.
Yeah, I will. I'll send it to you, and I will link it in these show notes that I share, because now that I've talked about it, and I'm sure that other people will want to listen, and Heather is just a rock star, so I'm happy to support her anytime. So anyway, Mary Beth, is there anything, kind of lingering on your heart, mind, soul, anything that you want to share or make sure to get into this conversation today that I didn't think to prompt you for, or anything?
I mean, just prioritizing your mental health. I mean, I feel like I just always want to emphasize that preventatively and consistently, just to put yourself in a good place.
Boom. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you.
Yes, I appreciate you too. Thanks for having me.
Had you ever heard of enmeshment before? I hadn't, and now what's funny is that I feel like I'm seeing it everywhere. But I was totally fascinated by this part of the conversation, and I think most importantly, it highlighted a struggle that I think so many families feel, but either don't have the words to put around it or don't even know that there are words that they can put around it. Almost like, just this abstract feeling of there's something about this relationship that feels hard, but I don't exactly know what it is. And now we have language for it. And we also heard Mary Beth talk about the beginnings of what it means to work through it. You know me, I love therapy. I say always work through it with a therapist, because why not? But yeah, I just love that. It's, you can bring these terms, these strategies to your therapist or coach and say, okay, help me with this. This is what it is. I also loved the part about modern preventative therapy. I don't think preventative therapy gets talked about enough. I've kind of jokingly mentioned it in the past that I think we should be assigned a therapist at birth the way we get a pediatrician. And one day I really hope to actually see that happen. But in the meantime, we can just go to therapy. We can go to therapy. We all have something to work on. And I think Mary Beth is such an amazing example of a therapist who is working to break through what is often said as therapy's marketing problem. The way she presents on social media, the way she keeps the content and the strategies relevant to today's world is what will continue to push the therapy mental health movement in the right direction. When I say therapy has a marketing problem, that's not my term. I've heard this a lot. obviously I follow a lot of therapists on social media. I talk to a lot of therapists, and there are therapists like Mary Beth out there looking to show all of us that therapy can be what you want it to be. It can be relatable. It can be relevant. It can be accessible. It doesn't have to be what we've seen it portrayed as on TV and in movies for decades of just, I don't know, just stiff or scary or intimidating. It really is just a wonderful safe space. But you guys know I love therapy. So anyway, I also love that she's coaching other therapists on how to further spread this word, grow their businesses, and expand their reach on social media, because that's where the kids are these days. That's where everybody is, right? So it's really pretty cool, actually. I'm a super fan of Mary Beth, and I just love that you are sweet mates with Maddie. That is the coolest thing ever. Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for being here. Thank you for listening. I will catch you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.